So I just broke my glasses, and you have got me fucked up if you think I'm using my backup pair here to record. So, not that anyone would have noticed anyway, but if you did, that's why. So, all things considered, that was a pretty uneventful trade deadline, honestly. No big guys like DeJounte Murray or Zach LaVine got moved. The big move was Pascal Siakam, who did not get traded at the trade deadline. Although that there were no big names here that really were on the move, I do think that a lot of important trades happened. There's two or three teams that I think really got significantly better, and I just want to highlight them and the moves that they made a little bit because I'm not sure that people are really thinking big picture here. The first team that got obviously better was the New York Knicks. I think that, Quentin Grimes was definitely a good piece for them, but he wasn't just really fitting in with the team. And getting someone like Bogdanovich who can get like just straight up buckets for you and Alec Burks too, like getting guys like that, I think it really works out for them. They definitely bolstered their roster, and, the Knicks are kind of a sneaky team, like in terms of competing. Obviously, Randall's out, and OG looks like he's getting surgery or something, or he's at least going to be out for next couple of weeks. 3 to 5 is what I remember seeing. So we'll see how they come back health wise. But, I think the only thing that would be really fun for them to do, being the Knicks, would be go get Mikal Bridges. But obviously, he's not on the move right now, and the Nets have reportedly turned down offers of 4 and 5, respectively, first round picks. So I don't know how you're going to get that guy. It's also worth noting that recently, due to increase in minutes, Dante DiVincenzo has been balling out there. Like, he's been getting some buckets. He gets them pretty quietly, but I still think it's worth mentioning that the dude has had a couple of 30-point games over the last, couple weeks here, and he's really like emerged as a really good scoring option for the Knicks, which, safe to say, was pretty unexpected, at least from me. I'm pretty intrigued with New York. I think that they're definitely a dark horse contender. They're not a contender. They don't have like that 1A, right? Like the Becky Hammond thing that she was talking about. But I don't think you want to see them, especially not early in the playoffs, because you saw what happened to Cleveland last year. Another team that I think made a pretty good move here would be the Dallas Mavericks. Grant Williams apparently was ruffling some feathers. Huge shock there. And it looks like a pretty good move on paper, in my opinion. It definitely depends on how PJ Washington ends up playing, but they also acquired Gafford for Rashawn Holmes in a second. So you made a couple of big upgrades there. Washington is an interesting player. Charlotte made a couple of moves, but we'll talk about that in a second. Dallas here got a lot of size because outside of Derek Lively, they didn't really have size. If you're going to try and compete in the West and you need bodies to play on a guy like Jokic, I think that size is kind of important. Just being completely realistic. Not that PJ Washington is going to be like a crazy defender, but I think he's had a couple of really high scoring games. I think he's had a 40-point game recently, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely an interesting piece for the Mavericks there. And like I said, Daniel Gafford locking it down, big rebounding kind of guy. Like, he's going to be a good player too for them. So really interesting pieces that they have. Obviously, Grant Williams is gone. They had to trade up a first, and I believe it was Dante Exum too, but correct me if I'm wrong. It was an interesting trade, to say the least. We'll see how that one kind of turns out towards the end of the year. The biggest, like, low key move that happened was Gordon Hayward going to the Thunder. The Hornets are definitely in need of like the Trey Man type. Obviously, that's a guy that didn't get a ton of PT in OKC, and the fans there really liked him. And Hayward is still like, even on this type of team here, good wing depth. Obviously, we know the injury history. Obviously, we know, some questions about his health, playoff time, whatever. But that's a guy who can give you 15, 5, and 5 pretty much any night. And even in like a reduced offensive role, that's something that you really need. Just like a guy that plays basketball the right way. I remember the year that he tried to come back on the Celtics. Immediately after his injury, he played. That was the most games he'd played in the last like few seasons, and he was bad. Like 11 points per game, like really, really rough stretches there. But then Kyrie and Horford left, Terry Rozier left, and the Celtics obviously replaced that situation with Kemba Walker. But it was just interesting because Hayward seemed to be like the third, or well, he was the fourth star. He was the fourth behind Jalen, but it kind of went like Tatum, Kemba, Jalen, and then Hayward was like the fourth star, and they were still like a super loaded basketball team. So Hayward definitely has had his fair share of contributions to playoff teams. I think it's really funny seeing all the people on Twitter like showing his highlights when he was on the Jazz. Like that wasn't during the Obama administration. Like someone was like, "Is that Kobe Bryant on the court?" It's like, dude, that was those Jazz days were so long ago. It's actually crazy. Another move that I thought was kind of low key, or two moves, I guess, that were kind of interesting were the Celtics moves. Obviously, I'm a Celtics fan, so I'm going to have to talk about this, even if they don't really end up being super relevant. But you get rid of Lamar Stevens and some seconds, you get Xavier Tillman, and then you got rid of Delano Banton, and then you also got in Jaden Springer. So Jaden Springer's interesting, not a great shooter, but he plays really good defense. Definitely is a good cutter. Kind of a like guy that you bring off the actual like end of the bench to come and bring energy and hustle and play. Like let's say the Celtics aren't hitting the three super well. That's the guy you bring in for one of the starters and just try and inject some energy into the lineup. I think he's an interesting piece. Tillman is really cool, just in his defensive versatility, kind of what you needed Grant Williams to be. But until Grant kind of became like not as great of a defender and more of a catch and shoot guy. Like Tillman is strong, but he's also quick, like laterally. There's a couple of highlights of him guarding Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, and he's very quick off the dribble, reacting to their moves, and he's able to block Luka on one play, I believe. So he's physical, but he's also quick, like really versatile defender. I think that's something that Boston is really going to be able to use, especially if, like, God forbid injuries happen. You've got some guys at the end of the bench now who are pretty locked down on that end of the floor. Overall, I feel like there's a ton of moves that I could talk about that really at the end of the day are kind of inconsequential. I've already talked about some of them that you're probably not going to notice big changes from. And again, if I missed any, sorry. I think that the stuff like Dennis Schroeder, Spencer Dinwiddie swap are kind of more or less irrelevant because it's not like contending teams. Like, yeah, I can mention that the Bucks added Patrick Beverly, but like, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that, I feel like it's worth noting, but I don't really feel like we know who Patrick Beverly is. You know what I mean? It's not like we don't know what he's going to do. It's interesting that Doc Rivers is coaching him now again, but I don't really have too much to add to that. Like at the end of the day, it's Patrick Beverly going to the Bucks. Yeah, he'll be helpful on defense. They do need some perimeter defense, and I think that he's something, especially at the guard position. But they needed perimeter defense on the wing. Didn't really get that. So I don't know. We'll see. It's going to be interesting to say the least. What's going to happen here? I think one of the big teams to look at is the Hornets, just because Steve Clifford recently mentioned something about not having enough talent. So I guess we'll see what happens there if they can, maximize some of their people they've brought in now. But I don't know. I think overall, you just have to understand that this was one of the more low key trade deadlines, and that's totally okay because not every trade deadline or offseason has to have a ton of player movement. There's still a ton of low key deals of players moving around that are going to be interesting. Definitely plenty of buyout candidates too. Interesting to see where those guys go. So all in all, I think while some bigger names didn't get moved that people were hoping to see get moved, at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty interesting trade deadline, all the same. And looking forward to see how these teams do in the second half of the year.